Kicked to the curb by their surging UK band, this pair of surprise musicians regrouped, hoping to form something even better. All they needed was a lead singer. After a grueling 8-month audition process, sifting through 500 different contenders, they finally found a singer. 2 albums later, they had their former bandmates second-guessing their decision. With a #1 record to their name, 2 #1 hits in their pocket, it was the ultimate payback. So why didn't they go back in the studio and do it again? Climbing to the top only to fade into obscurity? In 1989, they were arguably the biggest band on the planet for a few months. And then poof, they were gone. It's a Bottle Lightning mystery, next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever signed up for Columbia House's 11 cassettes for a penny, the 8 CDs for the price of one, that scheme multiple times under different pseudonyms, you're gonna love this channel. Make sure that you subscribe below right now, hit the red button, make sure to click the bell so you don't miss out on our newest interviews. We also have a Patreon that you're gonna wanna check out where you can support us there. It allows us to do even more interviews, more videos. So it's time for another edition of our series, Bottle Lightning. This is where we celebrate a song or an album that was king for a day. Here we honor artists and bands that rocketed up the chart, but for reasons unknown, they couldn't sustain that blast of success, called by some or many as one-hit wonders. We celebrate them instead as lightning in a bottle. And today we're going to head back to 1989 to check out an album that turned in 2 #1 hits, The Raw and the Cooked by Fine Young Cannibals. You know, when the beat, also known as the English beat, had to change their name in the US, when they split up in '83, the news came as a surprise to guitarist Andy Cox and bassist David Steele. Apparently, Cox and Steele didn't see eye to eye with vocalists Ranking Roger and Dave Wakeling. Still, they were caught off guard when the band's accountant called to finalize the breakup. Roger and Wakeling had left the 7-piece group behind. Their next move was to form General Public, another great band. And they did that shortly after, and they released the top 30 single Tenderness in 1984, one of the greatest songs ever. Meanwhile, realizing that they were on the outs, Cox and Steele resolved to regroup, only this time with a smaller lineup, hoping for less infighting and artistic compromise, apart from not wanting to repeat the mistakes of their former band. Both musicians really didn't have a clear picture of what to do. So they figured searching for a strong vocalist would be the best place to start. But finding the talent that they wanted proved to be a challenge. So the duo actually put an advertisement on MTV, inviting hopeful singers to audition. Seemed like a good idea at the time. After all, the ad did result in an outpouring of 500 cassette tapes. However, according to Cox, the quality of submission was downright depressing. He said, "I listened to them before breakfast. Awful. Took us 6 to 8 months to find someone, anyone. And in that time, we only found one person that we were interested in. Unfortunately, although this one person did have a lot of talent, he didn't fit the profile of what they were looking for. In fact, he was quite a bit older, having already been in a doo-wop group back in the 1950s. And just for reference, Andy Cox was born in '56 and David Steele a few years later in '60. Further complicating matters, this contestant, he lived in New York. And the pair were looking for someone on the other side of the Atlantic, preferably. Surprisingly, the MTV ad failed to produce a winner, and the duo were getting desperate. But then someone they knew suggested a guy named Roland Gift, a musician that both Cox and Steele already knew. In fact, Gift had played saxophone in a punk reggae band called Acrylics. They'd performed with the Beat on tour at one point. The thing was, they had no idea that Roland could actually sing since he was, always playing the saxophone. Said Cox, we got along with him, and that was important. We had someone call him to see if he might be interested. He was living in London, which was closer than New York. The first thing he said that he didn't play the sax anymore. He was a singer, and he did some work over some music, and we liked the sound. As they began to work together, it was clear that 60s soul was something that they could all agree on. Otis Redding, Al Green, Sam Cooke, they were all important influences for the trio.
Yeah, I'm sitting on the dock of the bay. Let's stay together. And working on the chain gang.
Said Roland Gift, that was the thing that brought us together. And Otis Redding was probably my favorite singer, still is. Taking these influences to the 80s, it quickly became clear that Roland Gift's vocals were tailor-made for radio. I mean, there's no denying that Gift's incredible falsetto gave this new band a distinct and recognizable sound. So it was a go. And the Fine Young Cannibals, naming themselves after a 60s jazz film, they formed in Birmingham in 1984. Soon after, they wrote and performed their first single, Johnny Come Home. It was on a Friday night TV show called The Tube. By the next Monday, recording contract offers started just pouring in. FYC, as they're often called, they signed with London Records in 1985 and they released Johnny Come Home as their first single. The band's eponymous debut was released on December 10th, 1985. A Mark James cover of Suspicious Minds was released early that next year. Both singles reached number 8 in the UK, and Johnny Come Home, that creeped into the Billboard Hot 100 here in the States. I believe it went to number 76, I think. From there, Fine Young Cannibals, they were in a hurry to get back into the studio and kept busy with a number of side projects. In 1986, they contributed a cover of the Buzzcocks' Ever Fallen in Love to the Something Wild film soundtrack. Great soundtrack if you've never heard it. So many great songs on that one. That scored the trio another top 10 hit in the UK. Fine Young Cannibals then connected with director Barry Levinson for the 1987 comedy Tin Men starring Richard Dreyfuss and Danny DeVito and Barbara Hershey. The film was set in the 60s, and they had the group appear as the house band during a nightclub scene. And 4 new FYC songs were featured on the soundtrack.
I bolted at 6 miles an hour. I bolted into the street.
Also in 1987, Steele and Cox, they released an instrumental single under the name Two Men, a Drum Machine, and a Trumpet. I love that. The single was called Tired of Getting Pushed Around. Although it was meant to be more of an experimental joke, it still reached number 18 on the UK singles chart. And also during this time, Roland Gift also started dabbling in acting. He took roles in the films Sammy and Rosie Get Laid in 87 and Scandal. It was shot in 88. Seemed like at this point, though, Fine Young Cannibals were more interested in playing with side projects and recording a new album. But finally, at their label's urging, they got back together in 1988. And their second album, The Raw and the Cooked, definitely took an unconventional path to completion. Since it did take so long, quite some time to put it together, FYC opted to include 4 of their previously recorded songs just to get it done. This included Something Wild's Ever Fallen in Love and Tin Man's Good Thing, As Hard as It Is, and Tell Me What. That in itself would almost be half the album, but then there was still the matter of actually writing and recording new music. Some of these new tracks, Fine Young Cannibals would produce themselves, but the label also wanted an outside ear, and they pushed for a producer. We'll find out who helped them produce the album right after I mention our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. Make sure to go to zenni.com today to get a brand new pair of glasses by clicking on the link in the description. You can design them to your liking. You can add amazing features. I talked about blue blocks a lot here. They protect your eyes from digital blue light, and they've helped me a lot with migraines I used to get. Check it out today. The Fine Young Cannibals pushed back on this idea of a producer. They only had one potential producer in mind. According to Cox, they wanted to get Prince. However, he did concede it was a bit like asking for Elvis or Phil Spector. Obviously, Prince was busy, and they weren't beautiful girls. As a compromise, though, the label suggested David Z., former Prince engineer and arranger, and also produced Prince-ish tracks for Jody Watley and Sheila E.
Just leave it all up to me. It's over you, a new boy I'm gonna choose. Hold me every time I leave.
The guys agreed that being 1 degree away from the artist currently known as Prince was good enough, and arrangements were made for that. Said David Z., I got called out of the blue. What it was they wanted to work with was Prince for their next record. They were told that Prince doesn't work with anybody that way as a producer for hire, but they were also told there were someone who works with Prince who does. That was me, and they were willing to try it out. Now, when David Z. met with reps from FYC's label, they mentioned the band was taking an excessively long time to get this record done. So the two parties agreed to have Roland Gift and company fly to Minneapolis in the winter, where they would have no choice but to finish the record being there. The Fine Young Cannibals ended up working with Z on 3 tracks: She Drives Me Crazy, I'm Not Satisfied, and It's Okay, It's All Right, parentheses song. The Raw and the Cooked was finally released on January 13th of 1989, and when it was finished, the record could almost be considered a compilation. I mean, it drew from multiple soundtrack projects, the production genius of David Z., and their own devices as well. Stylistically, it is pretty diverse. I mean, featuring old school R&B, there's a touch of modern rock, and plenty of funky Prince-inspired pop. The Raw and the Cooked is definitely, it's a classic 80s pop album. I released it exactly the right moment in time, you think about it. As a result, it topped both the UK and the US album charts, and it turned out 2 massive #1 hits, Good Thing and She Drives Me Crazy. As it turns out, She Drives Me Crazy almost never saw the light of day. Initially called She's My Baby when David Z. first heard it. The melody immediately grabbed his full attention, but FYC didn't think much of the song at the time. Said David Z., I called him up and I said, I love this melody, and I could create a great groove for this. They said they were ready to throw it away. But David was insistent, and he convinced Fine Young Cannibals to keep it. As they began to rework it, they started with the title, and that made the huge difference. She's My Baby, it's pretty generic. And as Z astutely pointed out, She Drives Me Crazy, that was a phrase every guy in the world has said at least once in his life with conviction. After they rewrote this crucial lyric, the band's attitude started to change toward the project for the better. As Z recounted, he started the session for the song by creating a groove loop on a drum machine. Musically, She Drives Me Crazy is a triumph of space between parts. I mean, those parts are designed to be tight and funk-like and precise, but with a rock edge. The distorted guitar works as a distinct counterpoint to the vocal melody in Roland's stunning falsetto. But among all the recognizable parts to this song, I mean, more than anything, it might be that David Z's patented snare sound that rises above everything else. Z, who put it together on the first day of tracking, he created it by taking the head off a snare drum and whacking it with a wooden ruler. After recording it through a Shure 57 mic, he twisted the EQ to the point where it sounded like a crash. From there, more tweaks and blends followed, including pumping the processed sample through an Aratone speaker set upside down on top of another snare drum. A little reverb was then added to the track later on, and the sonic result, it sounded something like a hollow woodblock. It's a signature sound from the 80s. Alongside Gift's vocals, this incredible snare sound, it just became the signature of the song. Said David Z, it was a matter of small things like that that were giving the track a personality to match the attitude of these new lyrics. That pretty well sums up the whole thing. Every note, every sound had a specific purpose, and they all worked together to put this track over the top. She Drives Me Crazy was released December 26, 1988, day after Christmas, just weeks before the Raw and the Cooked hit the shelves. A few short months later, it became the #1 song in America and also garnered heavy airplay on MTV. Now, the second single from the Raw and the Cooked was the former Tin Men track, Good Thing. Actually, my favorite song on the album. Riding the wave of its predecessor, it also became a quick chart topper, propelling the record to #1 on the Billboard album charts. And there it spent 7 weeks jammed between Madonna's Like a Prayer and Prince's Batman soundtrack. The album would just miss having another US top 10 single when Don't Look Back peaked at #11 in September. Although not as big as FYC's first 2 singles, Don't Look Back is a first-class groove, and it sports some superb vocals by Gift. Now, fourth single, I'm Not the Man I Used to Be, that stalled at #54. That was in December of '89, still in the 80s. But it did reach the top 20 in the UK. This was a huge head-scratcher for me. I thought it was one of the best songs on the entire album. I love Roland Gift's vocal on that song. It's just a great song, and listened to it over and over again as I listened to this album in '89. Let us know if you would like us to cover some of these songs in the future. Good Thing and I'm Not the Man I Used to Be. By the time their final single, the straight-up dance pop track I'm Not Satisfied, was released, Fine Young Cannibals running out of steam. That one peaked at #90 on the Hot 100. And that was the last single that we would hear from Fine Young Cannibals, at least in the US. Unfortunately, FYC's popularity, it disappeared almost as quickly as the band came onto the scene in 1989. The Raw and the Cooked is without a doubt one of the great pop rock albums of the late 80s, like I said. This band was everywhere in '89. You know, for a few months, you could make an argument that they were the biggest act on the planet. You know, Saturday Night Live, they were everywhere. They didn't really leave the charts in late 1989. I guess, you know, you think about it, they were an alternative to the teeny bop of Debbie Gibson and New Kids on the Block. And the dance pop of Milli Vanilli and Paula Abdul and Madonna and Bobby Brown, who were all dominating the charts, but FYC pushed past them all. Sadly, all of us would be left hanging, you know, wanting more, because the follow-up never surfaced. In 1990, the Fine Young Cannibals did record a cover of Cole Porter's Love for Sale. That was for the album Red Hot Blue. But by 1992, FYC had split, and since then, the trio has become something of a happy memory, lost in time. The band did regroup for a one-off project in 1996, recording a new track called The Flame for the Greatest Hits album. That's about it. 2014, Roland Gift said, "I fully expected the band to carry on and make a few more albums, but to be honest, I'm not sure what happened. We just stopped functioning as a band. It was sad, really. There's a lot of pressure from people around us to sell more and more records, but music doesn't work like that." Now, since its heyday, She Drives Me Crazy, it's appeared in several movies and TV shows, including 30-something in 1989. It was in Columbo in 90. Ferris Bueller, the TV series, remember that, in 1990. Highlander, the series, in 93. The Other Sister in 99. Cold Case in 2003. It was in Hitch in 2005. My Name is Earl in 2007. New Girl in 2013. Last Man on Earth in 2015. And Last Christmas in 2019.
Back in college, I was just not one of them.
She Drives Me Crazy has also been covered by a few artists over the years. Tom Jones with Zakuro. They Might Be Giants, Dolly Parton, even Sting did it a couple of years back. But this song's influence doesn't end there. She Drives Me Crazy also made a major impression on Taylor Swift, who was born the same year that it hit #1. On her 2014 album, 1989, Swift teamed up with co-writer and co-producer Jack Antonoff for 2 songs. One of these, I Wish You Would, was directly inspired by She Drives Me Crazy. Said Antonoff, "We were talking about the snare drum on Fine Young Cannibals. She Drives Me Crazy. Taylor Swift brought it up first, and I was like, you're not going to believe this. I just sampled that snare in a track. Jack played her the sample on his iPhone, and she was like, send me that track." And talking about FYC's first #1 hit, Taylor said, "I really think She Drives Me Crazy could be on the radio now. It's that timeless." Now, so even if you're not a fan of Taylor Swift or much of today's music, it's at least cool that the golden era rock hits haven't been completely lost on the new generation. I think we can all appreciate a time where instead of sampling that drum part, the bands or producers were actually figuring out how to invent it. Fine Young Cannibals are the epitome of the term bottle lightning, though. You know, for about 4 months, like I said, they were the biggest thing in the late 80s with 2 #1 smashes and a classic 80s album. I bought this cassette in the spring of 89, and I wore it out. Heading into one of the greatest summers in history, 1989. FYC was the soundtrack to the last summer of the 80s. I mean, Batmania erupted across the nation. MTV was still in its golden era, and Fine Young Cannibals made us believe that the 80s would last forever. Well, we now know that those days are gone forever. But She Drives Me Crazy and Good Thing, they bring you back, if only for an instant. Leave us a comment about Fine Young Cannibals and She Drives Me Crazy. What do you remember about this Bottle Lightning band and their 1989 run? They should have released another album. Let us know in the comments. If you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe below so you never miss out on our daily videos. We'd love to have you as part of this community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.